Greetings, business professionals, and welcome to another video edition of Building Better Businesses. I am your host, Steve Eschbach, and I'm delighted to have you join us on another one of our episodes. I am one of a few Transworld Business Advisor owners here in Chicagoland, and we specialize in assisting business owners confidentially sell and match them with qualified buyers. Transworld, by the way, is the world's largest and fastest growing business brokerage firm. I also own a number of other entities that are designed to assist business owners enhance value. You know, I have been a corporate executive and a business owner for more than 40 years, so you would think I would know everything possible about running a business efficiently. Well, you would be further from the truth. In fact, I am delighted to say that many of my successes have been attributable to you out there who have, quote, been there, done that in a world that never seems to stop changing. So I am delighted now to present another episode whereby we can learn from a subject matter expert on how to enhance your business operations. Now on to the next edition of Building Better Businesses. Good morning, everyone. Hello, this is Steve Eschbach. I'm president of Transworld Business Advisors of Naperville, and I'm delighted to have Steve Carr, who is a investor relations professional in and of himself, and he's also a lawyer, and he's also part of the Transworld team. So first of all, Steve, thank you so much for agreeing to participate on this interview for purposes of the book and podcast. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, great. So you and I have known each other for many, many years, probably about a dozen years so far, but we're going to rewind the videotape here. We're going to figure out who Steve Carr is and how he came to be. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Where'd you grow up?
You know, I grew up in a small farming town in northern Illinois, and the gig, I was the first person in my whole family to really go to college. And the thing about these areas, rural areas, which are still a big part of the country, and of course right now the first ones to open up from pandemic lockdowns, you know, the gig economy is nothing new there, because even though my family enjoyed the lifestyle of farming and we moved to a small town early on, people there often work 2 or 3 jobs to support their farm life. Mm-hmm. I mean, by the time, even when I was young, farming was very hard to be a sole subsistence job, and people worked in factories and sales, or, you know, a spouse would be a nurse. So the gig economy is not as new as a lot of us think it is. That's honestly how farmers survived for many decades.
It's interesting you mentioned that comment. One of our Transworld Business Advisor franchisee owners is actually a farmer by upbringing as well, and he does that along the side of running his business intermediary operation. So that's great. So what was your childhood like? What did you like to do back then?
Well, you know, I always liked to read, probably because, again, this was pre-internet, pre-email, and really even pre-cable TV. So life in a small town could be pretty dull. Rockford, Illinois, which was a large industrial town of about 100,000, was really where we went to, you know, find the only open bookstore. I mean, there were no Barnes and Nobles, no Borders, no Kindles online. So, you know, my parents were very supportive of education and higher education, and we spent a lot of time in that larger city for entertainment and education purposes. And I think everybody did the best they could to be supportive. My graduating high school class was 12 kids, most of whom did go on to college. And I migrated to the Chicago area for school. And, you know, like you, I mean, you've been around the country from, you know, Connecticut and other areas to the Chicago area for job purposes. But, you know, really to find white collar employment and get education, you had to leave the rural areas and go to a bigger urban area. And that's what I did. And Chicago has been good to us. I met my wife here. We've had our kids here. They've been to school around here. And Chicago has always had enough employment opportunities and cultural opportunities that it's been a good move, and never really had a reason to leave. Although obviously, as you know, in recent years, state funding and pension issues, and the business climate is taking a big turn for the worse.
Sure.
So I find it kind of hard to encourage my kids to stay here, to tell you the truth, which is kind of difficult. We all like Illinois, but it's not a great economic climate when you compare it to Florida, Texas, or a lot of other markets.
But we survive, right?
It is, for purposes, we will. For purposes of the topic today of buying and selling businesses, I think the good news is that there will be a lot more businesses to sell. It seems like 3/4 of the people we know in our group of friends have migrated to Florida or North Carolina or someplace similar from the north suburban Chicago areas. That said, there are going to be a lot of businesses for sale, but we may struggle with the asking prices. Precisely because I think people may expect a bargain,
right.
and also the sellers may be perhaps a little more motivated to sell so that they can leave.
Well, only time will tell. Hey, before we move on to where you are today, you talked about you growing up in a farming family. So were your parents primarily farmers, or you mentioned that they did other things as well? So if they weren't doing farming, what else did they do?
Really kind of 50-50. We did farming, and my grandparents and uncles were all in farming. My dad moved and migrated more to industrial sales and only helped out on the farms part-time. And my mom really only went back to work. She was what they then called a stay-at-home homemaker. But when I moved to college, she did go back to work off and on to help the family out. And then dropped out of the workforce again when it became feasible.
Sure, absolutely. So we know that you are a business intermediary with me at Transworld Business Advisors, but there were a couple of stops along the way. So our audience doesn't know this, but you do have a legal degree, but you also worked in investor relations in a number of different firms. So why don't we talk a little bit about the IR component and then get into the legal, and then we'll talk more about the business brokerage. So tell me about your investor relations background and how that all came to be.
Well, investor relations is very similar to public relations and public affairs. I think what's mainly different is the audience. I mean, in public relations, the practitioners really can focus on the general public or industrial buying public or any public. Investor relations is a management discipline that really combines a couple of disciplines, really. I mean, communications, you need to be a good communicator. Finance, you need to be, able to understand a balance sheet and an income statement and explain the finances of the company you work for or the clients you represent. And, it's, and then I think also, you need to be able to focus on, the key strengths of an organization, be able to explain that. It's aimed at a different audience, really, investors and corporate management, big hedge funds, small hedge funds, private equity firms. Be able to focus on the strengths and accommodate the weaknesses of the organizations you're trying to represent. The goal really is to achieve the maximum sustainable share price of a publicly held company, or to help a privately held company go public, or to perhaps buy and sell a company. In public relations, the aim is typically more to deal with a crisis or to sell products and services and deal with the publics that would determine the future of that audience. So I think those disciplines are very similar, but what's different is really the audience. In public affairs, the audience is really going to be a legislative audience or voters, Congress, regulators, people who are going to influence legislation and regulations. So that's just kind of the world we live in.
So I got to believe you, like me, when you were a young boy riding your bike around the neighborhood, I can imagine or I imagine that you, like me, did not have an investor relations career mindset back then. So you didn't tell your friend, I'm going to be an investor relations executive, or I'm going to be involved in mergers and acquisitions and advise accordingly. Same thing when you graduated from college. I'm sure you didn't have that in mind. How did you kind of get your way into the investor relations field? Did that come by choice? Did that come by happenstance? What can you tell me about
You know, it's interesting. I was actually an English major, and I wanted to be a great American novelist. So a career in business was not really something I was looking for, but to support myself after school, I made a living in journalism for some years. And I was recruited by a major public relations agency, Daniel J. Edelman, because they kind of really, PR really represents it works on the other side of the desk from journalism. And they figured if I was a good journalist, I could write, talk, and understand a good story and a good headline. So I was recruited to work on the other side of the desk. And like a lot of people, did well in the field, made some money, so I stayed in it. And as time went on, I became a business rainmaker, bringing in clients and helping bring in clients as part of a team for the agencies I worked for. So probably like a lot of writers and journalists or a lot of people, I was an introvert who became an extrovert, really to deal with clients and survive in the business world and the business development world. And interestingly, I've seen the same thing with one of my kids. My daughter was a history major, always a good communicator, but she was always a little shy and kind of an introvert. But as time went on, when she graduated, she worked for a few years in public relations. She got a master's degree, did some teaching, wound up in training, which is a great career. There's tons of training jobs because so much of our training now is online as well as in person. And over time, she graduated from being kind of a person who she still likes to write and communicate, but to deal with clients and to train, she had to become an extrovert. So I think a lot of people go through that transition. I don't know about you. You're a CFA. You obviously dealt with numbers and so forth. But over time, we have to become more other oriented if we really if we grow our careers.
I totally agree with you, and I think over time, you and I have both realized that you can't be a subject matter expert in everything, but if you are connected with those that are subject matter experts in areas that you are not, that is an excellent way to get 1 + 1 = 3. So there is a ESQ at the end of your name, so you have a legal degree. And I'm wondering how that kind of got into where you were and where you are today. Why did you, get a legal degree? We'll talk more about how important the legal profession helps business mergers and acquisitions. But how did Steve Carr say, you know what, I think I want to get a degree in law, and how did that come about, and how have you applied it?
At the time, I was enjoying a 10-year stint with Burson Marsteller, a major international agency. And there was a big trend at the time for people to go back to school and get MBAs. And in fact, my wife did that literally at about the same time. But to me, well, first of all, I was more conversant with words than numbers. And it seemed to me that law undergirds almost everything we do, especially whether it's an international business or business, mergers and acquisitions, crisis work. I've done a lot of regulatory work and spent a lot of time in government hearing rooms. And, I was just more interested in law. And you need to be a good communicator in the legal world. You need to be able to stand on your feet, think on your feet, speak, write. Although I know that lawyers have a terrible reputation for being writers because of all the jargon. But law interested me more. And, I never really practiced. When I got into it, I realized that to really be a practicing lawyer, I would need to go back and start my career all over again doing research in a law library. Well, by the time I'd been in business for 10 years, that had very little appeal. And I got back to being the introvert idea. You would then have to go back from being the extrovert dealing with clients, which I really enjoyed, to basically spending a lot of your time with online research in Lexis, or with the law books and writing briefs behind the scenes. And that didn't really interest me. Although, to be fair, let's face it, you and I at Transworld and PR and IR advisors, you basically are, you basically are behind the scenes a lot. I mean, your job is to make your client look good, not necessarily to promote yourself.
It's interesting with that comment, and I would argue that having a law degree or having at least a legal background is critically essential to corporate communications, M&A transactions, because the careful selection of words is critical to effectively communicate your messaging for PRIR, effective in M&A deals, because words are critically important. So it must have helped you along the way, especially in investor relations. You were involved in probably a ton of M&A transactions before getting into Transworld. So I'm sure it's benefited you along the way, no doubt.
Well, one thing that a legal background does for you, other than understanding contracts very well and the nitty-gritty of legal documents, I think a law degree, and I don't want to denigrate MBAs or other similar degrees, I think they all do the same thing. They give you a backdrop of credibility that's very helpful in your career. And I found that to be true of law for a lot of the issues and deals, as you say, deal making, crisis work, and also you're dealing with a lot of lawyers.
Right.
So, the lawyers who are advising the clients on buying and selling their businesses or contracts or issues they may be dealing with, or takeover fights for big publicly held companies. The fact that you may be a JD, or for that matter, a CFA, gives you a lot of credibility in terms of just working with the legal team. They, I think, start to feel comfortable very quickly. Oh, okay, this guy understands the importance of transparency, of confidentiality. He understands what we're doing when we work in these documents, or why we're taking certain actions. I've even helped, the lawyers draft many documents that, went out to various groups and various issues. I mean, I've helped law firms draft letters that went to the unions during strike negotiations, for example, that went out to the union employees. So, it's definitely been helpful in that regard. So I think credibility and transparency are still not just corporate buzzwords, but really are very helpful in today's business world.
Absolutely. So what do you like best about what you do professionally?
I think it's still the client relations. I mean, that's every client is different. They all have their goals and their personalities and the factors that are driving them to do whatever they're trying to do in the business world. And so I think client relations and trying to help the client succeed is just still my big motivating factor for sure.
It's critically important. I think client relationship is key to what we do. So what was your highest professional moment? Did you ever hit 75 home runs in a year, or strike out 200 batters in a year? What was your highest professional moment?
Well, I mean, definitely, going back some years, I had the very interesting experience of dealing with an airline crash with ValueJet Airways, which had a pretty terrible crash in the Everglades in the late 1990s. And I was later hired to help represent ValueJet in public relations and investor relations after the crash. And it really kind of forced me to use all my skills, law, IR, PR. But what was striking about ValueJet was the airline's board actually wanted to reopen for business under the old name ValueJet, which they all loved and
Yeah.
was a great brand name. It truthfully was the pioneer, even before Southwest, for the low fare airline category. Unfortunately, after the crash, it really tarnished the entire business category. People thought, gee, is it really safe to fly these, cheap, low-fare airlines? Maybe not,
Right.
even though the reason for the crash ultimately turned out to be a major flaw on behalf of a supplier, which had improperly stored some oxygen canisters.
Yeah.
And the airline was really vindicated, but unfortunately at a tragic cost. So the airline crashes are a multi-year, multi-audience issue. They take about 5 years, maybe longer in some cases, to really resolve. So it was quite a struggle in terms of dealing with investors, regulators, audiences of all stripes, the flying public, and ultimately the airline rebranded as AirTran, which I helped implement and was later purchased by Southwest Airlines. So it was a big successful turnaround. But one thing I think you really see in those situations is reestablishing credibility is very important. Transparency is very important. We never tried to hide the fact that we were ValueJet and that the crash had happened. We instead focused on all the improvements management has made with brand new airplanes, new management team, safety improvements, all the things you really have to do that companies today do to fix a problem when they have a problem. And it really reinforced, again, credibility, transparency, fix the problem, be honest with the public about what the problem was, what you're doing. And, that's the only way to recover from any kind of major issue.
And that did take some time, correct?
5 years.
5 years, yeah. That's
5 years. And unfortunately, a lot of people thought the airline was really a black hat. There was really a lot of anger and resentment.
That's a lot to overcome.
Aimed at the air. Yeah, it was more than just disappointment I think we're all disappointed sometimes with the way a lot of products and services perform. And a good company handles refunds well and is sympathetic to customer complaints. You're better to try and help a customer resolve the issue and take a complaint and accept a return and move on and keep the customer. That can be a hard lesson for a lot of companies to learn.
Yes.
One thing that's always struck me is that now that it's spring, the weather's better. We're all spending more time safe distancing at the garden shops and floral shops and places like that. Places like Lowe's and Menards and so forth, Home Depot, always have very liberal return policies, because if you're anything like me, I'm always going in to buy something and then finding out I bought the wrong size, or I didn't really want that product. I want something different. I'm always running back. Any home fix-it job seems to take about 3 trips to the store to really get it fixed. And I think they realized early on they had to be pretty liberal in their policies, or they were going to alienate a lot of customers. I think they've been pretty smart in that regard. And I think, I found that Amazon does a great job. Oh my gosh, we're constantly shipping things back to Amazon, and they made it so easy, just dropping a product back at UPS with a return label.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
So, Steve, it sounds like you've learned a lot along the way, and based on your learning experiences, you've adapted your professional career. Is there anything, as you look back, any different type of advice you would have given yourself, let's see, from right after college to where you are today? Is there anything else you would have advised yourself accordingly?
I probably would have stuck with some jobs longer than I did, and given them a chance to really see how they'd pay out in the 70s, 80s, and to an extent the 90s, despite some pretty severe recessions. in the early to mid 70s and, early to mid 80s. I kind of wish I'd given some places a little longer career run than I actually did. And I think, younger people today, if they're not self-employed, I think maybe you're giving their places of work a little more thread to run out than, maybe a lot of us did back then. There was just a lot of temptation to make a quicker hit and jump for some more money and a promotion. And I kind of wish I'd given a couple of places a little longer run, in all honesty.
Yeah, you and I can share the same story. So a couple things before we kind of call this a day, but we're going to talk a little bit about business brokerage now. So now you're taking your investor relations, your M&A background, and now you're kind of working at Transworld. Some of this is in your book, and I want you to mention your book. It was just released. I just read it. Great read. Talks about brand wins, how reputation is critical in this digital age. Tell me a little bit about the book, why you wrote the book, and how you think it's applicable today to what you're doing in the M&A arena with Transworld.
Well, Steve, thank you. As you noted, I've been an advisor for many years on transactions large as small, whether it's initial public offerings or companies buying and selling themselves. And with Transworld, you kind of have the opportunity to be more of you're a business broker. You're really functioning in an investment banking type role and a facilitator. So you're really more in the mainstream of things. And that's a bit of a transition for me, but it's a great transition to be more front and center, helping clients actually buy and sell their businesses. And the book is really aimed to help people, small business owners or managers of smaller companies, think through those issues. I mean, when should I start, thinking about an exit? Whether I'm working for a startup or, starting up my own business or working for a small or a large company or owning a company, eventually you're going to need to sell the company. Whether you're marketing the shares if you're public, or whether you're transitioning the business to your children if you own it, or to employees, or trying to find a buyer, or eventually that company must be sold somewhere, or it needs to be liquidated. And I think what I've seen already at Transworld, a lot of business owners are feeling to themselves, well, okay, I could liquidate and move to Florida, but this business is worth something. I'd rather sell it, and whatever the price is, I'd rather get some money rather than none. I've also seen business fatigue, what I call owner fatigue. For the mid-sized companies, I think at some point the owners and the boards simply get tired of going through multiple business cycles of crashes and booms. Whether it's the dot-com crash or today's coronavirus closings or issues or just normal recessions. I think people just get fatigued and finally get ready to just move on, try something different, retire. But what I always counsel people, and what the book says, is start thinking about that exit long before you actually need the exit. In other words, if you need water, dig the well long before your current source of water runs dry. And look at who the logical buyers and sellers might be. One digital company I've been counseling for a long time works with Microsoft and works with a lot of platforms of bigger companies. They're a pretty small digital firm, but we put together our list of potential buyers long ago. Private equity firms they've worked with, hedge funds, big, digital companies, all of whom, these business partners are potential buyers. Whatever you're doing, whether it's retail or business to business, or of course digital, or a service company, there's a list of potential buyers that immediately kind of come to mind. Well, the nice thing about Transworld is that we not only help market the company through internal proprietary databases and websites that cater to the buying and selling of businesses, but a lot of small business owners are not very sophisticated about what their options may be, and we can quickly help them not only price the business, but understand what some of those options may be, what some of the hurdles may be, what some of the opportunities could be. And, a lot of people are either too negative or are looking at their pricing and their opportunities through the rose-colored glasses. And it's a lot like buying and selling a home. We have an emotional attachment to our home, most of us, and are not really seeing very clearly, what the curb appeal may really be, and, what some of the, nice things about the home and what some of the negative things, may really be, and what some of our choices could be.
Right. So it sounds a little bit like your philosophy, maybe like mine, where I would argue that any business owner has to have an exit planning strategy among their top 10 items. Now, if you're starting up, I would imagine that would be near the bottom. But as you develop your business model and you adapt to the market environment, that tends to move up or down depending on where you are in the stage of your career. Do you agree with that philosophy, or do you have a different point of view?
Well, I think that probably is the norm in the process, that people start to think of it more towards the end of their business life cycle. But the book makes the argument that you should be thinking about it very early on.
Day one.
And that actually your plan for growth should actually involve exiting the business. I mean, how you actually look at growing the business and what your choices may be should be dictated not only by what the market is and growing it, but how eventually you plan to liquidate it. Are you going to be big enough to go public? Do you have kids in the family who might be interested in taking it over? Employees, or are you just going to have to go take it out to the broader world? Really, from day one, you should be thinking about how you're going to maximize the value of this business. I guess the argument in the book is that value creation process about how I'm marketing my wares is eventually going to shift to a value preservation mentality. Okay, I've got this business, it's worth X dollars. How do I leave?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the motivation for it, as I say, could be quite different. I've helped sell, many clients who were publicly held, where management saw, hey, you know what? This business is probably never going to be worth as much today, in the future as it is today. Now is the right time to sell. And that's when they sold out to another company. And they had a logical list of buyers in their industry or in similar industries who were interested in expansion or ramping up their industry, who could step in and buy the company at a great price. And there may be other reasons, personal reasons, health reasons is a big one.
Yep.
Also, as I say, just fatigue. Or maybe the industry has just changed and you simply, you're just not that interested in working in this business the way it's changed. I mean, the motivation, can just be all over the place, and they're all valid. Maybe your values have changed as an owner or a manager. And I think that happens, of course, to all of us as we get older. Maybe you're a lot more interested in animal rescue than you are in or sailing around the Great Lakes than you are in running your widgets business. And that's a valid reason for moving on from that business.
Absolutely. So one question before I ask you to kind of summarize what we may have missed. What's the biggest challenge you say? I think you kind of summarized it throughout the interview here, but is there anything that you might consider as the biggest challenge today as we go forward?
I think the biggest challenge is still for any business owner or manager figuring out what their options are. And that's where good advisors, and the book makes this point, great advisors are invaluable. I know this sounds a little self-interested, but don't stint your advisors, whether it's lawyers, PR crisis counselors, IR people, investment bankers, business brokers, your advisors are going to are either going to save you a lot of money because they know where to go, what to do, to make the good choices, and they're going to help make you a lot of money because they know what the options are and have the connections that you don't, because you've been spending your lifetime working on building your business. So, the book makes a huge point of this.
Yeah.
I've seen I experienced, in fact, some real horror stories where otherwise fairly sophisticated company managers or owners made some very poor choices in their advisors, and it set back their business plans by months or years, or ultimately cost them a lot of money. So
Totally agree. Totally agree.
big lesson there. I know it can seem hard for all of us, whether we're hiring a realtor to sell our home or hiring a business broker or a lawyer to work on selling our business. But the best choice you could make is hiring a good, trusted advisor.
Absolutely.
Look, it's just like getting a good personal wealth advisor. Your financial services advisor, whether it's Charles Schwab or Fidelity or,
right.
Whoever it may be, get somebody you really trust.
Absolutely. So, Steve, you pretty much summarized everything I wanted to talk about. Was there anything that we may not have covered that you want to talk about real quick before we end?
Not really. You've covered a lot, but I think my big advice would be just figure out your options and be very comfortable with it. My experience working with CEOs and business owners is that if you're asking them to do something they're not just plain comfortable with, that's a very difficult uphill sale. And ultimately, the business owner and manager needs to get comfortable with their advisors and their plan of action, or they're probably just not going to do it, or they're not going to do a very good job.
So it goes back to your point, which I think is made earlier on, that relationships are key and transparency is key, and that builds trust, which enhances everything from personal brand to corporate valuation. So where can our audience go to learn more about you? Obviously, they can go to the Transworld site. Where else can they go?
Well, look at LinkedIn, and I'll connect with anyone who sends me an interest, and look at Amazon Kindle and Skim Brand Wins, and hopefully that'll be a good starter to my philosophy. And if people are comfortable with it, then we're a good fit.
Absolutely, and I can highly recommend reading his book because it's very an easy read, and the nuggets that you can get from his experiences over the many years he's been in business will be invaluable to you going forward. So, Steve, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So long, Steve.